the end of his life. Birnbaum's name is a German name. The family is originally from Galicia, then moved to Vienna, then moved on from there. But there's also the name Barenboim. You know the director? Director. What do you call this? Conductor. Yeah. Daniel Barenboim. It's the same name. Okay. You have the name Bernstein and Borstein, or Borstein, right? These are all mean. The first name is pear tree, and then you've got Bernstein, which is amber. So the same name can go through different variants depending on where you're from and through migrations. What are the main schemes for giving Jews names? First of all, patronymics. And you see this a variety of suffixes. Zon, son, vich, vitz, affixed to a personal name. So Mendelssohn, Moses Mendelssohn, the famous leader of the Enlightenment, Moses, son of Mendel, becomes Mendelssohn. Sometimes in English we spell it with one S. If you're from Germany, you definitely spell it with two S's. Okay. You take the name Koppel. Koppel is Jacob. Yankiv is Koppel, right, in Yiddish. From Koppel you get Koppel, Koplovich, and various other forms of this. Ted Koppel, you know his name, right? Okay. Yudel, Yehuda, Judah. You'll get Yidel or Yudel, you'll get names like Yudelson. You can add on the suffix of your desire, right? Berkman, Berkson, Berkovich, right, and so on and so forth. All for somebody whose name was Ber. The diminutive of Ber is Berke. Okay, and there are other diminutives too. Matronymics, this is particularly Jewish. It's not so common amongst their neighbors. In traditional Ashkenazic society, Jews very often are known by their relationship to their mothers. So-and-so, the husband or the son of a woman. Okay? Tells you something about the role of women in traditional Ashkenazic life in Eastern Europe. So you get names like Sarason or Sorkin, right? Sorke is Sarah, so you get the name Sorkin. Dworkin, right? And you can go on and on. There's a whole list of these names, okay? Just look at any movie in Hollywood, and you'll find, and I want to sound like an anti-Semite, but there are a lot of Jews active in Hollywood, you'll find a wide array of these kinds of naming schemes. Okay, professions, like in any society. What do Jews do for a living? They often bear names that reflect this. Unlike Central and Western Europe, Jews in Eastern Europe have a very wide occupational profile. They do all sorts of stuff. They're very much engaged in artisanry, as well as commerce and other things. So you get names, I'm just giving you names that are synonyms: Schneider, Snyder, Chayat, Kravitz, Kravchik, Portnoy. Okay? What do they all mean? Tailor. Common Jewish profession. Okay? Depending on the language, right? You get variants of this. Okay. Sometimes some Jewish names are actually Hebrew. There was also sometimes used, that's the minority of names. So Chayat is, you know the famous porn star Ron Jeremy? No, you don't know what I'm talking about? Someone knows. Ron Jeremy's actual name was Ron Hyatt. Okay. Nicknames, again, like any other society, you know, these names, except for the matronymics, this is not so different from non-Jews, right? Nicknames are often based on physical characteristics, sometimes on other characteristics. Schwarz usually means someone with a dark complexion or dark hair. Weiss, obviously white hair or white complexion, but sometimes it can come from some other sources. Geduldig, meaning patient. Sometimes Jews got nice names, sometimes they got not so nice names, but it's largely exaggerated by myth, the extent to which Austro-Hungarian officials had the power to assign Jews insulting names. Okay? But some insulting names do exist. You know, names like Gestank, stink, right? There's a lot of this. But not all these names were meant to be insulting, but sometimes they're misinterpreted. Katzen Ellenbogen does not mean cat's elbows. It actually comes from somewhere else. Okay? Trying to think. Goldwasser. Remember Goldwater, who ran for the government? Goldwasser. His name was Goldwasser. Many of these names are simply fanciful names. All right? They're meant to be beautiful. Goldwasser sounds funny to us because we often think of urine. But that almost certainly was not the intention of the people who designed the name. The same way that Blumenthal means Valley of Flowers, Blumenreich means, you know, domain of flowers. You know, many of these Jewish names sound. Goldberg Golden Mountain, they're meant to sound quite beautiful. Yeah, right. They're not meant to mark people necessarily as Jewish, nor are they meant to be derogatory. Of course, for sociological reasons, over time, the frequency that Jews have them, they often lead to them being associated with Jews. And some of them are derogatory, but most of them are not. Okay. So Goldberg and Goldwasser are fanciful names. Names derived from religious functions are quite common, not just in Ashkenazic society, all Jewish societies. These are usually the most recognizable Jewish names across cultures. Of course, these things have their parallels amongst other Jewish communities. I'm dealing with the Ashkenazic case, but particularly the Hebrew-based names are very common that cross Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Romaniot, and other ethnic divides amongst Jews. So Cohen, probably the most commonly marked Jewish name for a priest, right? Kogan is simply a Slavic or Slavicized variant. Right? Russian does not have a ha. Usually ha goes to ga. Gamyet is ham, that's in Russian, right? So Kogan is just a Slavic variant of Cohen. And of course you can have a billion variants from this. Kahneman, Kaganovich, right? Kagansky, and a billion other things can go from this. I didn't even mention place names. I have them up there. Berliner, Krakowski, Litvak, Horowitz, Epstein. These are all names, sometimes in the German form, like Berliner, sometimes in the Slavic form, either Krakow or Krakowski. Same origins. Fanciful names derived from religious functions. Cohen, Kogan, Levi, Levinas. My wife is a Levinas. Just for a second. Levinas is simply a Lithuanian suffix added to Levine. Levi, Levine, Levinas. My wife's family is from Vilna. When they moved to Israel, they decided there are too many Levis in the phone book, too many Levines in the phone book, so we'll use up the suffix that we use in Lithuania, Levinas. Right? And of course, you have this famous philosopher in Vilna, Levinas. But he's just a Levi. Yeah?
You don't list surnames that come from acronyms. Are they very common? What proportion?
I do. I did a few of them. Like Cohen Katz, Cohen Sedek.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't be exhaustive, but that is actually up there, yeah. So
what proportion of Jewish names do you think are from acronyms?
It's a small proportion. They're recognizable. There's a lot of names that are misinterpreted, but they're actually from acronyms. It also crosses Jewish ethnic groups. Sephardic Jews and other Jews also do this. So, for instance, I'll get to the name. I'll get to some of these examples later of how names get reinterpreted. Katz is coincident, but it also means cat. And then the names transform themselves from basically, it means cat, so we translate the name cat into another language, or we pronounce it a new way, it becomes Kate's, things like this. But the whole origin of the name as coincident is very often lost in this process, right? Okay, Katzman, Katzberg, and so on. It's tremendously productive, but I would say on the whole, it's a low frequency compared to everything else. Okay, as for first names, to talk a little bit about the practices, this was the stuff that nearly divided my family, because my parents were a mixed marriage. My brother was named after my great-grandfather, who was Abraham. My father's family was a Gast, my Ashkenazi family. And then they saw that my brother lived. He survived childbirth and infancy. By the time I was born, my grandfather, my other grandfather, the Ashkenazi one, wanted to have a child named after him. And he wasn't dead yet, but he decided he didn't mind. But obviously what he was getting at here was there was a problem with Ashkenazi Jews and names, naming after the living. Ashkenazi Jews don't name after the living, the rest of the Jews do. They see nothing wrong with this. Okay? So that's one divide, interethnic divide amongst Jews. Vernacular names. Men and women have different registers. Because men have religious duties, men have to have names they can use for synagogue functions, essentially, for reading from the Torah. There is a finite number of names that are acceptable. There's a closed canon, basically. These names are all Hebrew and Aramaic, traditionally, plus a few other names, usually of Greek origin. Like Kalman is acceptable to be called from the Torah, even though it's not of Hebrew origin. But someone who's called Be'er, you don't call someone Be'er when he's called from the Torah. That's why you need a name like Dov to go along with this, all right? And sometimes you have even a Hebrew name, but it's still not considered appropriate. And you have multiple names. One is your Torah name. It's called your Leaf Lumen, your name you're called up for. And then there's your everyday name, okay? And this is why you have all the complexities that, part of the reason why you have all the complexities that Shlomo Aleichem was talking about. You know, my son is Itzik or Isaac, but when he's called up, he's Yitzchak, or is Avram Yitzchak, okay? By the way, Isaac is a Yiddish name. It's a variant on Isaac, but it's actually a Yiddish name, as is Itzik, Itzikel, Yitzchak, and so on, okay? There are many, many complicated variations. So that's the Shema Kodesh, the sacred name that men have to need for religious functions. They also have everyday names, usually called a kinui, a nickname. Women can adopt more freely from vernacular names because they don't have religious functions traditionally, or at least they don't have the same religious functions that men have. Okay? They're not called to read from the Torah, so they don't need a Hebrew name or Jewish name. And this is why it's so much more common for women to have names like Lazel and Glickel and so on, and men have these double barrel names, you know, Dov Bear, Chaim Yankel, you know, things like this, right? Okay. So this is common, by the way, amongst all Jewish communities. Women tend to get more vernacular names from whatever language they're speaking, or names that are inherited from the language that was spoken before the last migration. Right? You have plenty of Jews in North America who have Yiddish names, but they're English speaking. Because their parents were immigrants from somewhere else, and this goes on sometimes for generations. You know, very often when I hear people who don't know much say, I want to give my child a Jewish name, I'm thinking of naming her Lazel. And you know, many Jews who know something about names and languages today laugh and they say, what's Jewish about the name Lazel? It's a Yiddish name. It's not a Hebrew name. Well, then if it was Jewish, what's Hebrew about it? Because it's clearly not a Hebrew name. But most Jews can't tell Yiddish from Hebrew, so in North America, so you know, this is what happens. But that itself is changing, and we'll come back to that too. When I was a kid, most kids I grew up with, their Jewish names were Yiddish names. Okay? And they had a Hebrew name for being called to the Torah, and no one questioned what was Hebrew and what was Yiddish, and that's just the way it was, okay? No one knew much. A name like Zlata and Golda obviously go back a long way. That's why, you know, names are conservative. Naming practices are very conservative. We tend to keep names going much longer in the family after we've switched languages. Bunam has been with Jews for centuries. Jews stopped speaking Romance language, for the most part, centuries ago. Okay, this is one example. Okay. Avoiding the evil eye and other misfortunes. You probably know what I'm talking about. When children undergo an illness and barely survive, near-death experiences, very often they're renamed in the synagogue. My grandmother grew up in Istanbul. At some point, forgetting it was my grandmother or her mother, who knows at this point, she nearly died, so she was renamed Vida, life. Okay? You want to fool the evil eye. The evil eye should took that one, not this one. That kind of thing. Chaim is very common amongst Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews. Chaim. Alte, very common amongst Ashkenazic Jews, the old one. Okay. Yeah? Yeah, okay. There's a scholar here in Toronto whose name is Alti Rodel. And it only occurred to me recently that Alti is just Alte. But no one can say Alte in Canada, so Alte becomes Alti. Anyway, obviously first names can be used as an indicator of progressive acculturation and social trends. We've been hinting at this the entire time. As Jews acculturate and typically secularize, this is a process of the 19th and 20th centuries by and large, Hebrew names typically become relegated only to ritual and Jewish communal purposes. You know, most North American Jews of a certain age, the only time they've used their Jewish name, a Hebrew name, which will be a Yiddish name, is when they're called for their bar mitzvah. Okay? In everyday life, if you called it out to them in the streets, they wouldn't turn their head around. Okay? This has a precedent. This is not wholly new. It's new in the modern era in the 19th and 20th centuries, but in ancient times, we know, in Roman and Greco-Roman times, the same thing was happening. Very often, Jews in the diaspora had, and sometimes even in Israel, had their Jewish names or their Hebrew names, and they had their everyday names. So this is an ancient phenomenon. It's nothing new. It just stopped for a number of centuries and renewed itself. Right? There are very clear patterns of name change that happen. Again, I'm going to give you the case of North America because it's a society we know best, but we can find parallels virtually in every culture where Jews are acculturating in the 19th and 20th centuries. Generation by generation, you can track the changes that happen. Dov Ber, the first generation, becomes Bernard, right? Now his Jewish name is Dov Ber, but we call him Bernard, Bernie. The next generation, who's Dov Ber, is now Robert, right? The next generation that's Dov Ber is now Chris. Or, this is the kind of thing. These things are measurable changes that happen, right? They're trends, not hard and fast rules. Okay. Jewish names obviously come to bear a stigma. I don't need to tell you this. When I talk to my undergrads, I have to explain a lot of this stuff to them. It's another 10 minutes. But you know what I'm talking about, I think. Jews, by the 19th and 20th centuries, often want to escape from their recognizably Jewish names because it brings them misfortune, or because they're ashamed of them. Jews internalize a large degree of anti-Semitism. But of course, there are also very real consequences in European and American society for being recognizably Jewish. Okay? I know this is true in other cultures, like Arabic-speaking culture. I just know the specifics of it. It's a general phenomenon. Jews begin to change their names legally in the 19th century when it's possible. And again, they often follow very interesting patterns that you can trace. So in the European context, Hungarian Jews start off as Yiddish speakers. They then switch to German, right? This is part of the process of enlightenment and emancipation in the 19th century. Then Hungarian is by 1867 recognized as these, Austria becomes the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Hungarian is a language of equal power. Hungarian, they assimilate to Hungarian culture. And it's been argued the most assimilated Jews in European society prior to World War II, the Hungarian Jews, the most acculturated. The German-sounding names have to go. Because if you want to be a true Magyar, you need to have a Hungarian name, right? So Schneider becomes Schlesinger, or Schneider becomes Sabo. Very common Hungarian name with a super high frequency amongst Jews. There's a Yiddish scholar in Israel, Vera Sabo. She used to be Schlesinger. Okay? Kahn is Cohen. Kahn also means a boat in German. Right? It becomes Schiff. Because Schiff is a boat, a ship. Right? So people go through these games where they take sounds and meanings and play with them to come up with acceptable names that they hope are not recognizably Jewish. There's a famous family of Yiddish scholars and literature scholars. The family name was, I can't remember what the original name was, but the name means black. Every son took a different variant of Nat Black. There's Shmuel Nigger, there's Vladik, so there's Nigger, Shawnee, and Vladik. And then I think there's another one. Almost every brother in the family took a variant of black for their name. One to avoid the draft, one to do this, one to, for various reasons, this is a common Jewish game, so to speak. Right? I told you about the myth of Ellis Island already. People ask me about Canada. It's Pier something here? 21, is that it? Okay. They swear to me up and down that their names were changed by officials on Pier 21. And I say, I can't address that. I don't know. But they always tell me, you're wrong, the names were changed. I say, I'm talking about Ellis Island. People have researched this. America, I don't have to tell you, is not Canada. It's a different story here, although there are great similarities. I already spoke about Untitled Chapter and the Soviets exposing Zionists. Okay, so I'm coming to sort of the end of the main things I want to talk about tonight. Okay. I call the problems and joys of traditional Jewish names today. I was reminded of this when my own grandmother died. My grandmother, she's not a Polish Jew, she was from Romania. But she had the same problem in America that a lot of Polish Jews. She had too many names. My grandfather called her Scheindl, he was a Galicianer. She was called Jenny by some people, Scheindl by other people. What were her other names? Jenny, Scheindl, and... No, there was another name. I'm forgetting my own grandmother's name. It's crazy. There are at least two other names that she had, English names, depending on whom you were talking to, that were used. And then, of course, my father had his own names for her. He used to call her Gerechte Scheindel, because she was always right. She always did the right thing. She always be best. But that's neither here nor there. In any case, when she was buried, I went to look at the tombstone that was being prepared, and I saw that her father's name was Hunne. Hunne is an Aramaic variant of Elkanah. It said that she was the daughter of Hannah. And I got, very upset. My great-grandfather was not Hannah, he was Hunne. And what I learned is that many people who do gravestones and this kind of things today do not understand the traditional Ashkenazic and other names that they're dealing with, and this leads to a lot of errors. In Yad Vashem, it's known that for a long time there were problems because people entering the names of the dead were people from not of Ashkenazic background or European background. So you got a Moroccan Jew entering all these Ashkenazi names, can't make any sense of them. Things change, they correct them over time, they learn to deal with the problems, but you can't expect a non-Ashkenazi, you can't expect Ashkenazi Jews nowadays to know what to do with them. How are you going to expect a Jew from Morocco or Yemen to deal with Ashkenazic names for the dead, right? It's a mess. There was a famous scholar, Hunne Shmelu from Poland, an Israeli scholar in Yiddish. People call him all the time in Meistukot Chana. I think he laughed. But the name Hunne is not very common in Israeli society. The name Chana for a certain generation is. People didn't know what to do with the name Hunne. Okay? We're losing this kind of knowledge of traditional naming practices, which is why all these things are becoming increasingly difficult. Genealogical research, putting names on tombstones, doing research about the Holocaust, and so on, which is, of course, why someone like me has a job. Right? I laugh, but the paradox is the less you remember, the more valuable I and people like I am. This is, of course, now we should take out the checkbooks and give money to YIVO and universities so that people can do with these things. I'm saying this half as a joke, but I mean it in a serious way, that obviously there's been a huge rupture in cultural transmission that's happened because of the Holocaust, but also because of acculturation. It's natural. This is not a new phenomenon, but we're losing the ability to deal with some of these names. It's very common, someone comes to a synagogue, and they want to say Mishaberach for someone, right? Prayers for the ill. And you ask, what is Aunt Rose's Hebrew name? In fact, my mother-in-law is not sure what her grandmother's name was. There's a whole debate. Was she Rose or was she Shoshana? And I say her name was probably Lazel. Very often, Lazel, with the rise of the state of Israel, Razels became Shoshanas. But now rabbis are asked, my Aunt Rose, what's her name? And, the rabbis usually say Lazel or Shoshana nowadays, or something like this. Or they may just say Rose. People don't know what to do with these names, and they're trying to find the appropriate version.
Varda.
What's that?
Varda.
Varda, yeah, exactly. Names are a big problem. I didn't even talk about it for marriage and divorce proceedings. A lot of what we know about Ashkenazic names, not just Ashkenazic, all names, is when we look at ketubas. Right? Marriage documents have to have names that people are actually called. This is, of course, a problem with there's this slight change in spelling in the Russian government or other states. Your marriage can't be invalidated, you can't get a get, because there's a yud here, but there's not a yud in that copy. This kind of problem. But it does tell us a lot about it, and of course people are confused about these things. We are getting to what we talked about earlier today. You can trace the sociological pattern. There is a resurgence of old Jewish names in North America and elsewhere. But those old Jewish names in North America are a very select bunch, right? Names like Bessie, Rose, Saul, Nathan, Jacob, Isaac, Max are common. But names like Isidore, Stanley, not so common, right? In Israel, it's a very different story. I'll show you the Israeli case in just a second. Israel, of course, has its own sociology. First of all, I'll say this and then I'll get back to the Israeli case. There's a phenomenon that I like to call the visit to Israel. North Americans go to Israel phenomenon. North Americans go to Israel, they study there for a while, or they spend time there, they fall in love with an Israeli perhaps. They name their children 15 years later in Israel with an Israeli name that was popular then. By the time their children are born, those names are now dated in Israel. Right? So, my wife's Israeli. So I laughed because we knew better. I didn't care. I named my older daughter Orly. Knowing that she's Orly, she's 7, but that the other Orlys are all 50 years old, right? The other daughter is Talia. If you look at this list, Talia is among the top names. Yeah, it's very common for, I gave the kid the right name for the right generation. The other name, I did her a disservice, but if that's okay. She lives here, not there for now. Okay. Israeli society, obviously, there are multiple sectors of society, each with its own distribution of names, frequencies. There's a religious sector, the secular sector, the Arab sector. There's, of course, Sephardic versus Ashkenazi, plus other ethnic cultural groups. The religious sector likes to give names that you consider very often old school Ashkenazi names. Names like Chaim, plus some old school Ashkenazi names that never made it here, or that were revived from the Bible. Okay? These names are often the names of the first generation, the early generations of Zionist pioneers had, that fell out of favor in Israeli society. You'll still find them to some extent amongst the religious Jews. The Arab sector, the secular sector, tends to like to use names. For a long time, they were using names that were nature names, names like Tam, right, dew. Then you had a trend of gender ambiguous names. My wife is Shalom, but Shalom is a boy's name. Tal is also ambiguous. There are many of these names that were used to be girls' names that are now becoming boys' names, or just completely ambiguous. That's popular. An increasing trend is to use names that fit into European or North American society. Some of this was fueled by the Russian immigration. Very often, former Soviet Jews in Israel like to give Russian or European names like Nicole to their children. I have relatives, I laugh, their son is Oli, but their daughters are Miley and Emily. What kind of Israeli child is named Miley and Emily? Because Miley Cyrus was popular, and so you get that trend. These are the most common secular names here. I don't know if you can see how closely. Each city has a different profile. Ashdod is heavily Russian, Jerusalem is heavily religious, but there's a certain number of certain names that keep repeating themselves, like Alma. There's a skit in Eretz Ne'aderet, which is this Israeli comedy show, kind of like Saturday Night Live, about this roll call in the classroom. Alma with an A, Alma with an, Alma with an Aleph, Alma with an Ayin, Alma without an Aleph. There's like 30 girls in the classroom named Alma, right? Talia is another very common name. Arab sector. Most Arabs obviously don't give their kids Hebrew names, unless they're biblical names or Quranic names that are shared by the Hebrew Bible in the Arabic version. But increasingly you find that amongst Druze, you do find Druze with Hebrew nicknames. Okay, that's not uncommon. The same way that you find that certain Israeli Arabs assimilate to Israeli Jewish norms in one way or another. Naming is one of these areas. They might be in their family context one name, but in their work context, they have a more Jewish Israeli sounding name. That's not uncommon. Sephardi versus Ashkenazi, of course, there's going to be a different balance. Of course, with blended families, people of mixed origins, everything is changing. It's life. It's constantly developing. It's hard to catch. Old names, lesser used biblical names, and new coinages, as I said, are more common amongst religious Jews. New names, contemporary coinages, internationalism, ungendered names, more common amongst the secular Israelis. In North America, we have, I've talked a little bit about this already, vernacular names versus Jewish names versus Israeli names with a lag time versus religious names. There's all sorts of trends that are happening here, okay? On the one hand, increasingly North American Jews, I shouldn't say increasingly many, hard to say when I'm not sure when I'm starting to count. But it's not uncommon for North American Jews to give their child one name that's a Hebrew name that works in English and for religious purposes. Abandoning this very ancient diasporic pattern of having a name for internal Jewish life and a name for external life. Just give your kid one name, a Hebrew name. Jewish names, to a large extent, meaning names from diasporic Jewish languages, have gone out the window for most North American Jews. Very few Jewish kids today are named, Yosef, if they're not religious, or I don't know, Shangle. You do find Shana sometimes, which is based on this name, but you don't find a lot of Shangles. And I can go on. There's not a lot of Zalmans out there. Okay? Zalman, by the way, Shlomo, Solomon. It's just another variant of Shlomo. One of the funny things that he complained about when they were trying to reform names in Poland was there were too many Jews named Shlomo Zalman. Or Jews whose name was Zalman and their father was Shlomo. Because Jews had lost the perception that Shlomo, Shlomo, and Zalman were actually the same name. Ashkenazi Jews don't name after the dead, and here they were doing that. By the way, I forgot to tell you, it's on my mind, one of the funnier names I saw in the press, there was, I don't know if it's real or it's a made up story, there were Kehillah officials in one city complaining that there was a Jewish girl whose name was Ulina, like urine. Why Ulina? Well, her grandfather was Aaron, and they became Aaron or Urin, and from that they made a feminized version of it, it became Ulina. And they were trying to tell the Jews, the people don't name your child that sounds too much like urine. People interpret names in different ways and do different things with them. Okay. Israeli names, as I said, are becoming more common. They've been quite common for some time, post-1967, I would say in particular, but even before. But of course, there's that lag time I mentioned before. And there is a very different set of names chosen by religious Jews and secular Jews in North America. I look at you look at the JCC where I live, in the annex, you look at the kids who are in the nursery school, and you see a bunch of names like Max and Sadie. And then you see all of the, I'm forgetting what the names they're using now, Chloes and Zoes. Both trends coexist, right? That's not like the group of names their kids, Chaim and so on. They either have old school names like Abraham, Max, or Israeli names, or they've got names that have nothing to do with the Jewish tradition. Okay? I'm sure if I go to Thornhill, you have a much larger Jewish population, you find a different distribution of names. I don't know, has anyone studied Jewish naming practices here in Toronto? It's a worthwhile study for a small impact, but it would be interesting to compare with other North American countries. And of course, I'm ending with the joke that you all know already. He's named Shlomo after his grandfather, Scott. Right, the law of return, that the third generation goes back to its roots. And, Scott was from the 1960s and 70s. The kid born today is being named Shlomo. And he's probably far more religious, his parents, than his grandfather from Glencoe, Illinois is. That's what I have to say for tonight. I'm going to stop there. But I'm happy to entertain any questions. Yeah.
I have one question. I don't know if I'm being accurate here, but I remember hearing that religious Jews give their children who have an identifiable handicap a kind of generic name. And I don't know if I'm reporting that accurately, but I remember hearing that.
An identifiable generic name?
Yes, like a name that is not reflective of their family tradition, but rather something that identifies them in some way as being handicapped.
This is interesting. I don't know about this, but this is very interesting. One thing